The first of our 3 disturbing camping stories is one of the most chilling true crime cases ever to come out of the Appalachian Trail. 2 friends had set up camp deep in the woods near Dismal Creek, far away from anyone. One minute, they were laughing around the fire. The next, they were running for their lives. What makes this story even more unsettling is that another camping incident happened in nearly the same exact spot, but 3 decades earlier. Then we check out 2 bonus, creepy, true camping encounters based on Reddit posts. It was May 2008, and Scott Johnson and Sean Farmer had set up their campsite near the isolated Wapiti shelter, just off the Appalachian Trail. From the moment they'd arrived, both men felt uneasy, like unseen eyes were watching their every move. That morning, Johnson had gone fishing, and as he drove back to the camp, he saw something unexpectedly blocking the dirt road. A dog lying in the middle of it. Johnson stopped his truck and got out cautiously and approached the dog, wondering if it was injured. It jumped up, greeting Johnson as he got closer to it, and then a man suddenly appeared from the creek bed nearby. He seemed ordinary enough, just another camper. They exchanged small talk, and the stranger mentioned that he hadn't had any luck fishing in the creek. Johnson was surprised at that, and he walked back over to his truck and he opened a cooler that was full of fish that he just caught, and he handed the man a few. He was completely unaware that this friendly encounter would soon take a dark and terrifying turn. Later that day, Farmer was busy setting up his tent at his and Johnson's campsite near Dismal Creek. He had just finished hammering the last stake into the ground when the same man from earlier stepped silently out of the woods. He introduced himself, mentioning casually that he had already met Johnson down by the creek. Farmer greeted him warmly and invited him to sit by the fire. Moments later, Johnson emerged from the trees, smiling when he recognized their guest. The 3 men sat around comfortably, talking casually about camping trips, fishing spots, and their favorite sport teams. The man even stayed for dinner. But shortly after dark, the man stood up and called to his dog, "Come on, boy, we need to get back to camp." As the dog trotted toward him, 2 sharp cracks split through the quiet night. Johnson spun around in shock and saw the man standing there, holding a gun. Johnson watched Farmer go down, and panic surged through him. He turned and ran for the trees. Suddenly, something slammed into him with bone-jarring force. He stumbled, and then he dove behind a cluster of thick trunks, trying to catch his breath and get out of sight. His heart pounded as he reached for his neck and felt warmth spreading across his skin. He clamped his hand over the wound, doing everything he could to stay conscious. What he didn't realize yet was that he'd also been hit in the back. Then the man turned his attention back to Farmer, who stared into his cold, expressionless eyes. Farmer's face was already injured from the first blast, and summoning every ounce of strength that he had left, Farmer charged towards the man, desperate to stop another shot. But he wasn't fast enough. A second round struck him in the chest. Even then, Farmer's adrenaline surged, and his towering 6'5", 380-pound body somehow stayed up. He stumbled forward toward his Jeep that was parked near the tents as the man chased him. Farmer reached the Jeep, scrambled inside, and then slammed his foot on the gas and drove away. Johnson was watching all of this happen from his hiding spot. He then stood up and pushed through the dark woods, cutting through them and down towards the road, hoping that Farmer would pass by soon. Moments later, he saw the Jeep's headlights and he jumped into the road, frantically waving. Farmer slammed on his brakes and Johnson climbed into the Jeep. Then they tore away from the nightmare they had just survived. Both men had been hit twice and needed immediate medical attention, but the nearest hospital was at least 40 miles away. Farmer sped the Jeep down the dirt road, and at one turn, he lost control and slammed into an embankment. Johnson, seeing Farmer's consciousness slipping away, yelled frantically at him to stay awake. He leaned over and grabbed the steering wheel, shouting instructions. Farmer, who was now barely conscious but alert enough to understand, pressed down on the pedals while Johnson steered with one hand, still pressing tightly against his neck with the other. They finally reached the bottom of the mountain and spotted a few scattered houses. Johnson yelled at Farmer to stop, and then he leaped from the Jeep before it fully halted, sprinting towards the nearest house and shouting desperately, "Call 911! Call 911!" At the same moment, Farmer dragged himself out of the Jeep, barely able to stand. He staggered towards the door just as it opened. A woman named Melissa Miller stood frozen in shock, staring at 2 men who looked as if they had just walked out of a nightmare. Melissa raced to her phone and called 911. For the next 45 agonizing minutes, Johnson and Farmer sat huddled on the porch, wrapped in blankets that Melissa had quickly placed around their shoulders. When the ambulance finally arrived, Johnson and Farmer were quickly transported by medical helicopter to Roanoke Hospital. Miraculously, despite their grave injuries, both men survived. Word quickly spread through town about the two campers who had just been shot, and it didn't take more than a couple of hours for retired sheriff's deputy Tom Lawson to hear the news. Instantly, memories came rushing back to him from another grisly camping incident nearly 3 decades earlier that happened just 2 miles from Johnson and Farmer's campsite. It was May of 1981. 2 hikers, Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey, had set out along the Appalachian Trail. When they failed to show up for a scheduled meeting with fellow hikers, Lawson was brought in to investigate. Search teams spread out through the nearby woods, and eventually they found Laura and Robert. Piecing together evidence, investigators formed a grim theory. Robert and Laura had been ambushed while they slept at their campsite. They believed that Robert may have died from 2 gunshot wounds. Investigators believed Laura tried to escape into the woods, but was ultimately found not far from the site. Her personal belongings were scattered throughout the area, and included a paperback book marked with a red sticky fingerprint. At first, detectives hoped the fingerprint might identify the killer, but frustratingly, it didn't help. Weeks passed without leads, until the police received a strange report about an abandoned truck. A note attached to the vehicle claimed its owner had been kidnapped, but something didn't add up. After some digging, police discovered the truck belonged to a man named Randall Lee Smith, and that Smith had written his own kidnap note. Investigating further, authorities learned Smith had earned the nickname Lion Smith due to his habit of spinning elaborate, unbelievable stories. Smith was found in South Carolina, and he was brought back to Parisburg, Virginia, which was his hometown, and he lived eerily close to Robert and Laura's campsite, which was only a small hike away from his back door. Deputy Lawson compared Smith's fingerprint with a fingerprint from Laura's book, and they were a match. With the evidence finally fitting together, Randall Lee Smith was arrested, but prosecutors claimed there were holes in their case. Facing uncertainty in court, they struck a plea deal. Smith would only serve 15 years behind bars. He was released from prison in 1996 at age 42. As the years passed, he drifted further from society, increasingly drawn into the isolated Appalachian Mountains. In 2008, he left his home for good and disappeared into the woods. Nobody realized that he was gone until his mail began piling up at his home. Soon, investigators posted missing persons flyers featuring Smith's picture. And as Johnson was rolled into surgery, a deputy showed him the missing person flyer. Johnson immediately recognized Smith's face, confirming that this was indeed the man who had opened fire on him and Farmer. For Tom Lawson and other deputies, Randall Lee Smith had been on their minds from the moment they learned of Johnson and Farmer's attack. The chilling similarity to the 1981 murders of Robert and Laura had instantly raised suspicions. After shooting Johnson and Farmer, Smith had stolen Johnson's truck, and not long after that, a state trooper spotted the vehicle and began following it. Smith panicked and he sped up when he saw the officer behind him. He quickly lost control of the truck, he swerved off the road, and he crashed, suffering critical injuries. When the troopers approached the wreckage, they found Smith along with evidence that connected him to Johnson and Farmer's attacks. Smith was taken into custody, but had been seriously hurt in the crash and passed away a few days later. The next 2 deep woods camping stories come from Reddit users who were just out to enjoy some quiet time in nature until things got dark. I'd been camping in the northeastern Ohio woods for years, drawn back time and time again by the promise of quiet nights and the comfort of being far from anyone who could bother me. It was my secret place, a spot where I could spend days and nights alone, miles from anywhere, with nothing but the sounds of the forest to keep me company. By the 3rd night of my latest trip, I'd settled into a peaceful rhythm, a dreamy state where the world outside the woods fades into a distant memory. But that night, just as I was drifting off under the stars, I realized I wasn't alone, and before the sun came up, I would learn just how close I'd come to never leaving those woods again. Sometime deep in the night, I woke up needing to relieve myself. I slipped out of my tent and walked about 10 feet, and that's when I saw a headlamp, maybe 80 or 100 feet away. I froze and stood still for 10 minutes just watching that light. Whoever was carrying it was staying in the same spot the entire time, but was pacing back and forth like they were waiting for something or maybe they were just restless. My gut told me something wasn't right, so I crept back to where my gear was stashed. I laced up my boots and I grabbed my hatchet. I wasn't trying to play hero out here, but I knew I needed something to protect myself if things went south. I had to find out what this person was up to, so I moved as quietly and slowly as I could, circling in a wide arc, hoping to get behind whomever was sharing these woods with me. Just as I started easing away from the camp, I froze. My stomach sank like a stone. About 50 feet in front of me, another headlamp appeared, its beam slicing through the darkness as it moved straight toward me. Not knowing what else to do, I dropped to the ground and carefully pulled leaves and sticks over myself. Moments later, the second man walked right past me. He was so close I could smell his cigarette smoke and the hoppy scent of the beer that he had just cracked open. My heart pounded so hard I was sure he'd hear it, and sweat dripped into my eyes as I clenched every muscle, trying to stay perfectly still. When he finally drifted far enough away that I didn't think he would notice if I moved, I got to my feet and began creeping toward the first figure again. I snuck up behind the first guy and was now about 10 feet away from him, crouching low beside a tree trunk. After a short time, his phone let out a soft ding. Then the glow of his screen lit up his face and he stopped pacing. His eyes were now fixed on whatever message he'd gotten. And then he turned and he started heading straight toward my camp. Soon, I heard them tearing through my campsite, scattering my things like they were searching for something. The whole time that was going on, I could see their flashlights sweeping through my sight. In the silence of the night, I heard one of them say, "He was just here." Eventually, they left, their footsteps crunching through the underbrush as they walked away from my campsite, heading toward the path that would lead them out of the woods. I stayed where I was for what felt like hours after their lights vanished into the trees. Finally, I came out from behind the tree and took a few steps forward to where the first man had been standing, and what I saw made my skin crawl. There were empty beer cans and dozens of cigarette butts thrown all around. Someone had been there a long time, just sitting and watching. When I went back to my campsite, I gathered up what was left of my things, picking through the mess they threw everywhere. I emptied out my torn-up tent and left its shredded remains behind. Then I walked out of those woods for the last time, knowing deep down that I would never camp alone there again. I was 18, camping in the Appalachian Mountains with 3 of my buddies. It was one of those nights where we just chilled, swapping ghost stories. I remember Eddie telling us about a woman who kept hearing whispers from her attic every night. When she finally worked up the nerve to climb those creaky attic steps, she pushed open the door, and what she found made her blood run cold. Dozens of children's drawings were laid out across the dusty floor, each one showing her asleep in bed, like someone had been watching her for weeks. The latest drawing sent a chill crawling up her spine because it showed her standing there in the attic, in the exact position that she was now in, but behind her loomed a massive, dark shadow figure, its head tilted as it stared down at her with empty, hungry eyes. That story really got to me for some reason, and I remember glancing down at my watch right as Eddie finished it. It was just after midnight, and none of us were tired, but we figured we should probably get some sleep, even if I wasn't sure I'd be able to now. But before any of us stood up, we noticed Eddie, who was sitting right next to me, go pale as a ghost and fall dead silent. He grabbed my leg so hard I almost yelled out in pain until I realized his other hand was pointing with a shaky finger out towards the darkness of the woods. We all looked, and there, just beyond the reach of the firelight, stood the silhouette of a man. He was just standing there and watching us. I swear I could feel his eyes drilling right into my chest. One of us called out, trying to sound braver than we really were, but the figure didn't answer. We watched him for what felt like an eternity before he turned around and slipped back into the darkness, vanishing as if he had never been there at all. Even then, we stayed sitting where we were, frozen with fear. We thought that he might be coming back with every snap of a branch or rustle of the leaves that we heard. We knew that packing up and trying to hike out of the woods in the dark could end in us getting lost, but we also knew we couldn't just go to sleep and leave ourselves vulnerable. So we did the only thing we could think of and split into 2-man watch teams. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. Thankfully, nothing else happened, and when the sun finally rose, we packed up and hiked out of there. Even though we told each other it was probably nothing, that it was just a spooky night and we'd let our imaginations run wild after all of those horror stories, deep down, we were all on edge. 2 days later, I was standing next to my mom, helping her make breakfast while the news mumbled in the background. I was cooking scrambled eggs when the words coming from the TV froze me in place. The spatula slipped from my hand and fell to the floor as the news anchor said that on the same night we were camping, and not far from where we pitched our tent, 2 hikers had been found dead and the authorities believed a man was responsible. My heart slammed against my ribs as the weight of it all crashed down on me, realizing just how close we'd come to never making it out of those woods. There you have it, 3 disturbing real-life camping encounters straight from the deep woods. Which ones stuck out with you the most and why? Let me know in the comments. And, as always, I'm John. Thanks for watching Stories Beyond the Ordinary.